pearls that are Bluetooth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Pearls.
Maybe I should just start decorating, put some bling on there. What do you
That's
think?
what I'm, well, yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's
so too.
sterling silver and a little turquoise on it. You could ride a horse with it.
Right? Hey, that's a good idea. Well, I do actually. It's funny, on the weekends, I have this on and my phone in this like little pocket thing on my saddle, and I'm working while I'm sitting on the back of my horse.
And
so.
she got first place this last weekend.
Yay!
Okay, come on
barrel
now.
racing.
Yeah, barrel racing.
When I was in college, I went to visit a friend of mine who's family owned a cattle ranch, and I wrote as a youngster, but I wrote English. I wrote up there. And I admired this guy's horse, and he's, I'll bet you $25 you can't stand him. He said, that's a bet. And I stood on it, or I got on it, it was fine. And then he showed his horse the barrels. Oh man, I just can't make it realize.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's kind of scary sometimes.
It is, I just,
No, she was here.
no. I'm a mother, I know how to make
Do you have
myself
that?
good.
Is it working okay?
More realty? Can you hear
You
me?
guys hear it
Yes.
okay?
Good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. You get to
Okay,
introduce
we're
us
good
and
to
I'll
go.
introduce him.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you coming and taking these classes. This is sponsored by Kim Mitchell of Chicago Title. She will be here in a little bit. She actually had a sales meeting this morning, so she'll be here in a little bit with the sign-in sheet because it is a continuing ed hour. And we've got Bob Sweeney. This is Environmental Management Systems. They're going to go over the due diligence for septic systems.
This
Thank
is
you
my
guys.
partner and wife and the CEO, CFO of the company, Katie.
And I'm the bad news. We started our company, I'll do the background very quickly. In 1949, when
Yeah.
Bob came back from a government-sponsored trip to Bosnia, where he was rebuilding
1998.
infrastructure following the war in Yugoslavia that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Our daughter was a freshman at a private college, and he said, let's start a business. I don't want to be a regulator anymore. And I'm thinking, are you out of your bleeping mind? But here we are, all these years later, and our bills are paid, our homes are paid for, and everything's good. We offer an awful lot of services that can help you sell rural property, homes in the city that are on septic, homes or property that are on kind of steep slopes. We can help you with all that stuff. And we do answer our own phone. We're fully staffed. We've got your back, really. We love working with realtors. My killer line for the whole day is, we don't get paid out of closing. Did everybody in the room hear that?
Yeah.
Good, because don't ask, and I get really cranky if that happens. We can't do that, but we're glad to help you. We answer a lot of questions. We won't start charging until we have a contract or whatever. We can respond to the due diligence inspections usually within 2 or 3 days. Usually. Once in a while not. On that note, I'm going to operate the machine and let Bob take over. He's the know-it-all. I'm just a cranky person.
Thank you, Katie.
You're very welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. All right, so this is the advance button.
It is? Okay, there.
Should be. Let's try it.
I did. It's over here. It's not over there.
Try it again. Sometimes you have to work with new technology. Oh, that's even better. All right, so as Katie said, I was a regulator for 20 years, Deschutes County, Multnomah County, Southwest Washington Health District, which was Clark, Skamania, and Klickitat County, managed liquid waste there, and I was involved with environmental and public health and civil affairs in the Army Reserve, so did disaster preparedness and wastewater, etc., through the Pacific Islands and Korea and Thailand and Bosnia, etc. And when I came back from Bosnia, I had a contract with Southwest Washington Health District for a year doing special project, but started the company then and have been doing environmental management systems for 22 years.
Who's that
and we have a
cute
staff.
bird? Who's that cute person doing that wetland?
Yeah, Katie actually likes to get in and find bugs and worms and snakes. Not really.
Nobody else in our office will take me out in the field.
She's a little queasy. Move forward.
All right.
Okay, so we provide a lot of different things. We're going to talk about mostly septic systems today, but it's really important that your inspector really understand the whole picture and not just looking at some components. So we do site evaluations for wetlands and septic systems and drainage and all kinds of things. So anything that you need to do with regard to the soil and the geology, we can be involved with that. And then the design of the treatment systems. And of course we use the technology available, aerial photographs, and LiDAR is something that's really powerful, fairly recent, tax lots of course, and soil maps. All that stuff we look at before we even go out to the site. But we do have to go out to the site and actually dig in the dirt. The upper right is digging for wetlands. That's a shallow determination. Your site doesn't have to be underwater to be a wetland. It just has to have saturation close to the surface. It's not always obvious. So we're looking at the soils and the plants and the hydrology. The upper right is a transport line that used to be part of the septic system that used to be further away from the Sandy River, but now the river ate it. And so just one of those things we look at when we're evaluating sites. Lower left is a test pit where one of our guys is in there actually looking at the soils, evaluating how well that soil will act as a biological system. It's not just soil as dirt, but it's how that system, the bugs, the worms, the roots, and the evidence of water table play into the system. And on the lower right, that's how we often start with our evaluations, is actually doing an auger hole, and then we determine where to bring in the backhoe to dig a pit. Next. And we get into the design of systems. We typically are involved with difficult systems that have been denied by the county or are already known to be challenging sites. We don't do too many designs for the simple septic tank to a drain field, but we do some of that. And so these are sand filter septic tanks and sand filters under construction. Very good technology. And we do construction management and inspections. We design them. Somebody needs to put them in the ground correctly and certify that those systems have been done that way. I'm going to move through a lot of these slides fairly quickly. There are too many slides, but I want to answer your questions, so feel free to stop at any time. When we do troubleshooting for a septic system, we're looking at physical problems. Some of the above ground sand filters are bolted together and those bolts can rust out. We didn't design any of these systems, but when we go and we look at them, we see what the problem is. A lot of weight inside that sand filter. Septic tanks can float, not just the plastic ones, but concrete ones can also float. So anti-buoyancy is an important thing, especially in the high water table areas that you find around here. And then you have to dig things up and you start digging and finding the problems, and you have to be able to look at the septic tank, and believe it or not, septic tanks can actually smell bad. We know what they're supposed to smell like. They're kind of musty. They don't really smell bad. But when you have somebody that's got problems using drugs, pharmaceuticals, etc., you can actually get something that's the wrong color and smells bad. And got to recognize that. A lot of times what we'll do is some camera work to try to find out where things are. The older systems are just buried, no site evaluation, no as-built diagram. So we're in the existing system evaluation that we'll talk about. We're trying to find it through the plumbing. And sometimes we'll use ground penetrating radar to try to find things rather than digging it up. We try to do as much non-destructive investigation as possible. And a lot of this, most of it is designed to protect wells, surface water, groundwater. Most of the wells we'll see around here are drilled wells. Got denser soil, rock, etc. that you're drilling through. These are fairly well protected from contaminations on the surface. The driven wells, those are basically in sand, and they are not protected from contamination. It's just a matter of how much that unconsolidated material is there before the intake of the well. So if you have contamination from industrial sources, septic systems, etc., that can get into these wells. And of course the old systems where people actually dug the wells by hand, those are often very shallow and also not protected from contamination. Your water system may also have some kind of a containment vessel, such as a cistern or some kind of a tank. And those well systems can be contaminated anywhere along the line. It's not just the well that may be contaminated, but the piping. When they put the pipes in, did they clean the pipes, flush the pipes, or did they get some dirt in there? So when they install a well, you got to flush that out, flush out the plumbing, all those kinds of things. So when we start looking at a well, you want to make sure that you flushed out the system. A lot of times we'll put chlorine, bleach in the well and pump that through the system. Make sure that you've got that totally through the system, flush it out through every faucet, including the hose bib in the yard and the one you forgot about that's in the garage, etc. Otherwise you have pockets of contamination that'll come back on you. So we flush that system before you take the well samples.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So I noticed this one house we just looked at last week with a client, and there was a lot of, in septic, a lot of rust that kind of came up on the house side of it and whatnot. Is that just that it's hard water, or, is there anything that would be, it's not right next to the well. There is some next to the pump area, but I just wonder if
Well,
it's evidence of something.
the question has to do with iron, rust that you're observing in the well, on the house, the walls, those kinds of things. And yes, that can be because of natural iron or buried iron from a dump site. But natural iron is very common. And if you have a high water table and that's in contact with your foundation, that can wick up and you can get that rust on the foundation. So it's an indication that you've got a high iron and high water table. It's not necessarily that you have a flood event above ground. It could just be wicking up. And you could also have flood where you'll see marks on the trees and so forth. You want to be looking for that kind of thing. Anyway, wells, there have been some studies that found that a lot of wells are contaminated, 70% in this one study. And you can get sick from that stuff. Oregon DEQ and Oregon Health Authority recommend annual water tests for arsenic or for private wells. If you have a public well system, 15 more units, or you're gonna be testing for many more if you have a public water system. But we're just talking about residential. It's not really very well regulated. The actual well is not that well regulated. You've got pumpers and drillers that are involved with, and plumbers that are involved with constructing the wells. But basically, they're putting in a notice to the Department of Water Resources that they're going to drill a well. So they're expected to do it right. But there's no real testing to understand what that soil layer is. So, go back one. So arsenic, coliform bacteria, and nitrate, and the arsenic, they've made those a lot more strict, so 10 parts per billion. And then coliform, you shouldn't have any of it. And that's an indicator, more organisms that will let you know that there could be contamination from mammals, humans, etc. And then nitrate is one of those things that, 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen, but nitrate, when it's nitrogen and oxygen.
I think your issues with
Mr. Dixon.
just
Okay, how's that? Is that better? No, not really.
Can't hear you.
Not on at all. Technology.
Hey, well, you've got love it, don't you?
No, you do not.
So when when they put in a well like that, is there an inspector that comes in to make sure that it was completed correctly?
No. So the well driller drills the well and submits the well log to the Department of Water Resources, and then if they're a larger system, there are some more things involved. And then you have your plumbing permits. And so you've got qualified individuals that do the drilling and do the pump installation and the plumbing for the house. But contamination can happen along the way. And there's no real guarantee that it was done as well as it should be. Typically, they're gonna drill down until they find a good source, and they will pump that out, test the well to see if you got enough quality, and they should be testing it, the laboratory for quantity. Quality at the lab, quantity is what they test for on the site. Anyway, nitrate can be a problem because nitrogen can combine with oxygen. The oxygen can get your bloodstream and take the place of oxygen that's supposed to go through your blood vessels, so that can be a problem. Next. And you got all kinds of things that can come from contamination. Organisms and chemicals, etc. Typically testing for indicator organisms, not so much the actual pathogenic organisms, but things that will tell us that there could be contamination. Next. It hasn't been very long that we have had biology, and the medical science didn't know till about 165 years ago that there were such things as organisms. That's pretty recent. And this was an incident where Dr. Snow in London tried to figure out the patterns of all these people getting killed. 578 people in 10 days from bad water. They were all drinking out of this common well. They didn't have plumbing to the house, so they would all go there, get this, and take it to their homes, or bottling companies would bottle it and sell it. Well, this was actually on public sewer well that was 10 feet away from this well. And they had some folks that came in from India with cholera. And cholera went wild in the community. One of the things that they did to find out the patterns, they tried to figure out who was getting sick. And the people at the brewery that were drinking beer didn't get sick. So beer saved the world.
Is that the alcohol?
Well, they weren't drinking they had their own well, and it had the alcohol.
Yeah.
Question? All right, so septic systems, the beauty of septic systems is they're quiet. The typical septic system just works and works and works, especially if you don't have all the pumps and the fancy things that we have nowadays. But until you smell something, you have sewage in the yard, or you want to sell or buy property, then you need to be interested in septic systems. Helps to know a little bit about them. Next, please. And about 33% of Oregon residences are on septic systems. Not all well diagrammed and so forth. Next. So septic systems have been around for a long time. Little places like in Minoa near Greece, Crete, they had septic systems. The Romans had septic systems and systems that flowed down into the river and into the Aegean Sea and the Adriatic. What's that big one? Mediterranean. We were just there. Next. And so we had disposal systems discharging just out of the way, moved into treatment and disposal, and then treatment and return. And nowadays we have systems that actually have telemetry and computerized control panels, and it will treat it to a high level. And you can get that for your single family residence. And sometimes you have disinfection, usually not, but that is possible. In fact, you can treat it so well that you can use it in Intel in some places on site. Next, please. So there was a long list of agencies and public health service. They didn't document things too well. They had guidance, and then the EPA came in around 1970, and the state agencies in Oregon and Washington started to beef up their requirements, and local counties have their own, but DEQ is centralized in Oregon. Washington, it's a little bit more decentralized. Next. 2014, January 2014, DEQ came in, well, there was a new law that required maintenance inspections. It's called a voluntary program because you don't send that report we're going to talk about to DEQ, but it can go to DEQ or the county as a method of looking at a system and getting an authorization permit to use an existing system. So technically you don't have to do a septic system inspection, but then you're liable if you don't. So there's a due diligence and a requirement for the buyer and the seller to pay attention to that kind of stuff. If the system is done, it can't be done by a home inspector or a septic pumper. They have to be a qualified registered environmental health specialist or a wastewater specialist, which is a subset of environmental health. Professional engineer, most don't do this kind of work. This is basically a pumper organization or a DEQ certified person that's can do the work. And they must use this DEQ existing system evaluation report that you have a copy of. We don't submit it to the agencies, but it's part of the due diligence. And then many of the systems that you have the newer systems will have sand filters or alternative treatment technologies. Those are alternatives to sand filters. So they're equivalent to a sand filter, but they're proprietary devices, typically recirculating textile filters or aerobic systems that bubble air in there and get the treatment of the system to clear water. Next. There's a lot of different systems. Privies and cesspools are the old types, and the step up from a cesspool is to add a septic tank in front of it. Still a hole in the ground, and then a septic tank to a drain field, at least that's shallower, and that spreads it out more. And then the septic tank to a sand filter or equivalent, that would be the alternative treatment technology. And you can get into layers of treatment. You can get more and more elaborate with your treatment system as needed to protect the receiving environment. Next. And of course, we still have pit privies and outhouses, or same thing. They're not technically illegal, but you have to have a lot of water between, or a lot of dry ground between the bottom of one of these to get a permit. You might be able to actually get a permit for a pit privy in eastern Oregon some places, but you don't see too many of those. There are some. Part of the evaluation, you would have to identify that. Next, please. Next step up is a cesspool. Now, these cesspools you typically see in, East Portland. They may be 5, 10, 15 feet to the top and then go down another 10, 15, 20 feet just to get the sewage down. This does all the sewage treatment, and maybe you'll have an overflow into a drain field. This is a dry well, a lot like this, because everything will fall out of the septic tank. So what we're trying to do here, this is a well here into the water aquifer, and this is pretty close. There's a 100-foot setback, and any of the contaminants that go through there should be treated within a few feet if it's properly functioning. I've gone to sites where you take a sample 10 feet away from your drain field, a failing drain field can be good. Depends on the soil, the hydrology, how much water is in the soil, etc. But that's kind of what we're looking for, and we'll go into some more. So the primary thing that you're going to find, primary treatment, is a septic tank. Typically, you're going to have the water sewage coming in, and you'll have a T out, and the idea there is to keep the floaters and the sinkers in the tank, scum and sludge, and the liquid goes out to the drain field. When these layers build up too much, that goes out into the drain field, starts clogging the soil. That's when you have to replace your whole drain field. So it's worth, at minimum, you can't really buy a septic system that's any less than about 1,000 gallons. And when you get more than about 4 bedrooms, you go up to 1,500, etc. And it depends on the sizing, depends on the flow. If you've got office in there, you got daycare, those kinds of things can play into it. Next. And there are various configurations. Most of the septic tanks are going to be concrete around here. You'll still see steel septic tanks. Those last 40, 50 years before they rust out, depending on moisture conditions. You do fix.
Bob,
Yes.
question. So I know it's common to see green grass, stripes of green grass where the drain field is. Is that indicative of quality or health of the drain field?
It can be. So the trenches that you put in will have backfill over the top. So if your water is starting to back up and reach that backfill, which has a different structure than the sides of the drain field, then that effluent can wick up, and it shows that you're
Leach as well as other soil. True?
right. A lot of it depends on the soil. In some cases, your actual your drain field, over the drain field will actually be, shut that off, will actually be drier and less water there, less greenery right on top of the drain field. So it can either be greener or drier because of that backfill area. So, not one way or the other all the time. Next. And you've got different sources for the effluent from your house. It depends on what you're doing. If you have a home occupation, that's going to change things. Most families, they have people there in Lewisburg arrange without pumping their tank. It all depends on how different numbers, and the bigger the tank,
what the,
one of them, and
yeah,
every time I see one of how this was done, and oil is goes out, does it block? So that's what it should look like. It's supposed to look at, upsell you on
That operational state.
the tank itself, protecting the tank, water getting on what everything, especially so in other words, painful these days. Test the fire. October, what costs and all that. Motion, just ma'am.
So they have gone extinct right on the spot.
Often you will the house by 25,000, harsh chemicals. So we try, buyer, seller doesn't, so gotta be aware of that. Many systems are aged and need to be, typically, you're asking with this to do a complete inspection. But if you are calling, is there somewhere in there that gives you an option out of some of that?
On our, I think it's the wastewater addendum that we use. I haven't used it,
Stripes in the yard, those kinds of things may show up some concern.
So thank you. Thank you for your time, Doug.
Thank you.
As you recall, we actually don't have an answering service at our company. People answer the phone, and unless I answer the phone, you'll get somebody who really knows.
Hey, guys, I know these guys for